Hello, this is Miss Mason reading Counting by Sevens by Holly Goldberg Sloan. We will be reading chapters 14 through 17. Chapter 14. The next week I went online and ordered a cab for Mexicano Taxi again. In the special comments request box, I asked for Jairo Hernandez. He was on time and had his license and vehicle inspection records ready for me on the front seat. I checked them again, because I think it's important to always be thorough. As Jairo pulled away from the curb, I noticed two things. The first was he'd gotten a haircut. The second reveal was more alarming. Because his hair was shorter in the back, I could now see a nevus on his neck. This means I saw a mole, but not a regular-looking mole. It had, in my opinion, the signs of trouble. It was asymmetrical, and it had flecks of red and blue on the broken edges. 1 infant in 100 babies is born with moles. I doubt that's fun for the parents. Who wants a spotty kid? But almost all moles disappear in the first 20 years of a person's life. And that is why if a new mole appears, or an old one changes into something else, attention needs to be directed to this area, medically speaking. I didn't want to alarm Jairo Hernandez, but there was a real possibility that he might not be aware of this bad-looking mole, because it was on the back of his neck and he couldn't see there very easily. So while we drove across town to my appointment with Mr. Del Duke, I stared at his skin issue, and I felt compelled to write the following on an index card. You need to have a dermatologist perform a punch biopsy on the mole, nevus, on the back of your neck. If it is not too much of an invasion of your privacy, I would very much like to look at the pathology report. I will be taking a taxi next week at the same time. This is important, so please do not take this medical suggestion lightly. We'll owe chance. I handed him the message when I got out of the taxi. Maya and I were able to talk more easily now in Vietnamese. I had effectively mastered the tones and accent by obsessive listening at night to audio lessons designed for State Department employees. You could download the sessions if you had a password, which was not hard to get if you knew what you were doing. It was like we had a secret language, because on the school property no one else but Quang Ha spoke Vietnamese. We walked around the buildings and the parking lot, still half looking for Cheddar, but really just talking. We were both interested in botany, and I tried to explain some of the things I knew, without sounding like the host of the Discovery Channel. We were sitting under one of the few trees out in front of the main school district office when I said to her, in Vietnamese, "You are my new best friend." Mai was silent. I knew that she had many friends at school, and that her friend Alana was the one she considered to be her closest friend. I was just a little kid, and I realized I had overstepped. What kind of person only knew someone for a few weeks and said something like that? So I added, "Since I just started a new school, you're right now short of my only friend, so that makes the distinction perhaps not much of a difference." And that made Mai smile. Chapter 15. Roberta and Jimmy Chance. In American Sign Language, the motion for the word parents is to follow mom with a sign for dad. Roberta Chance was finally at her doctor's appointment. It had been over a year since she'd first seen a small dimple on the left side of her chest. She was going to bring up the little dent during an exam, but Dr. Pedler saw it even before she had a chance. The next thing Roberta knew was she was being sent to Bakersfield Imaging Center just down the street. They wouldn't even consider making an appointment for the future. They wanted her over there now. It was only 3 blocks away, so Roberta left her car and walked over. The medical technician at the imaging center seemed to know she was coming, but the woman didn't smile when she handed her the lavender smock. And almost everyone smiled at Roberta, because she had that way about her. It wasn't until she put back on her street clothes after the ultrasound that it occurred to her something was wrong. That was when the doctor asked her to come into his office. Because wasn't she already in his office? Did he mean some place where he did bookkeeping or ate takeout food for lunch? Roberto followed Dr. Cucino down the narrow hallway and into a small room with framed pictures of pink angels. On the doctor's desk was a vase filled with silk flowers that might have once looked good, but now were dusty and faded on the side that faced the window. It was there, sitting in an upholstered chair that felt moist, like someone might have peed in it and the whole thing never dried right, that the doctor told her the news. Her dent was a tumor. The physician's mouth was moving, and she could hear what he was saying, but it didn't mean anything because it wasn't happening to her. Someone else was in the chair. And then the doctor stood up and said he'd give her a moment to herself, and that she should call her husband. Jimmy Chance operated heavy equipment, which is how he and Roberta had met. Just out of high school, they'd both signed up for an introductory class to get a commercial driver's license. Roberta was the only girl taking the class, but Jimmy would have noticed her even if the room had been full of beauties, because she was open and confident. But he was really attracted to her because Roberta was happy, and that showed. Now, as he left work to meet her at the medical center, he felt like he was the sick one. What did it all mean? They said that the surgery needed to be scheduled immediately. Her voice was so dull on the phone. The only other time he had heard Roberta sound that way was when the man in the fertility clinic had said they couldn't have children. It had taken his wife all of 10 minutes to decide that they would adopt, and her enthusiasm for life then immediately returned. That took 4 years to happen, but the adoption had worked out, so this would work out. There would be an answer. There had to be. For him? For Willow? For her? Yes, for her. Because he would do anything. For her. Roberta and Jimmy sat outside the medical center on a wooden bench that was dirty. She put her shoulder blades back and realized she was leaning against crusty bird droppings. Did birds get cancer? Jimmy was holding her hand, but they both were silent. She was glad for that. There was so much she wanted to say, but really so little. They had long ago said what mattered to each other. Roberta put her head on his shoulder, and sitting there in silence, she didn't think about herself or about her husband. She thought about Willow. Her love for her daughter now literally made it hard to breathe. Roberta shut her eyes to keep the tears trapped under her eyelids. She made her decision. They wouldn't tell her. Willow was far too interested in medicine to deal with this right now. They would let her in on the situation when it was over. After what seemed like 5 minutes, but was actually over an hour, they got up to go. They decided to leave Roberta's car in the parking lot down the street and take Jimmy's pickup truck so that they could be together when they drove across town to the next appointment. They would not be alone now until this thing was figured out. Ever. It was mid-afternoon and the sun beat down in a brutal way. Drivers were cranky as they navigated through congested streets, not giving an inch. It was every car for himself or herself. But Jimmy and Roberta were in their own world in the front seat of the pickup. They were traveling down I Street, and up ahead the traffic light was red. Jimmy slowed, but before he came to a full stop, the light changed to green. Ordinarily, he would have looked to see if anyone was entering the intersection. But not today. Not now. Jimmy's hand reached over and touched his wife's arm, and at the exact moment that he made this connection, the world literally came apart. They were T-boned in the middle of the intersection by a driver for Med Service Hospital Supplies. His box truck was loaded down with oxygen tanks, and he was already 40 minutes behind schedule. The driver watched the traffic light turn yellow, and then he stepped on the accelerator, believing he could just glide right through the red signal. Instead, he sailed straight into a pickup truck. Jimmy died on the scene, but was still put into an ambulance and taken to the hospital with his wife. Roberta stopped breathing 3 hours later during emergency surgery. The driver was left in a coma. The only piece of metal not mangled or burned by the collision was a yellow triangle with black lettering on the back bumper, which read, "Safety first. Tell me how I'm doing. Call 800 MEDSUP. I'm truck number 807. Chapter 16. Maya and I sat outside today on the steps of the trailer office. When the door swung open and Dell and Kwang Ha emerged, I got to my feet and followed Mai down the stairs. Dell's forehead crunched up. "What are you doing?" Mai gave Dell a sly smile. "Willow doesn't want to have a session today, but we were thinking maybe we could all go for ice cream. Chocolate chip cones would be nice." Dell looked like he had just lost bowel control. He stammered, "Willow has an appointment. That's not something that's optional." I glanced off into the distance. Kwang Ha couldn't hold back a snicker. Dell turned from Mai to me. "Willow, you've been ordered to come here for behavioral reasons. It's not optional." I looked right at him. "I was sent here under false pretense." For the first time, Kwang Ha actually seemed interested in what was going on. He said, "Why does she have to be counseled? She hangs out with my kid's sister, so she can't be any kind of troublemaker." Dell appeared panicked. He started to babble, we must, this today?" Mai came to the rescue. She stared at the counselor, whose arms were now giving a strange flap as if he were trying to fly, and said, "We want to go to Foster's Freeze. You could drive us. You and Willa could talk about her counseling in the car." I could see on Dell's face that he was shocked at how cheeky the teenager was. Then Mai spoke to me in Vietnamese, and I answered her. She said that she thought our plan was working. I told her that I agreed. Dell and Quang Ha both looked surprised. I guess they were unprepared for us to share the language. The next thing we knew, we were all in Dell Duke's dusty car, heading out of the parking lot to Foster's Freeze. And that's where it all began, really. Because as I've watched the school district offices recede into the distance, I was certain that the old dynamic between Dell and Mai and me was over. And endings are always the beginnings of something else. Chapter 17. Back in the Now. Next of kin. That's what they want to know. Kinfolk. Who talks like that? But that's what they are asking me. One of the kinfolk is in the Valiant Village, which is a care facility for patients suffering from dementia. This kin is my father's mom. My Grandma Grace sits in a chair in the lobby in front of a non-working fireplace. She even takes her meals on a tray there. An aide feeds her. Gigi's husband died of a heart attack on his 65th birthday, and she started to lose track of things after that. Should I tell them? My dad had one brother, but he was older and drifted away from the family when he found work overseas doing private contracting for the military. No one had heard from him in years. My dad didn't even know if his own brother was still alive. I tried to find him when I was 10 years old, and from what I pieced together, I'm pretty certain that he died in some kind of accident involving a cargo plane. But I didn't tell my parents. And my mom was an only child. Both of her parents passed away when she was in her late 20s. I never even got to meet them. I don't have aunts and uncles and cousins. We aren't that kind of family. We've had misfortune and a lot of bad health. And now this. Thinking about the kinfolk health histories was the only time I've found comfort in being adopted. Now I cannot think. I cannot concentrate. I cannot breathe. No, 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 no. After a lot of questions, all that I say to the officers is, I have one grandma who thinks every day is Tuesday. The shadows get longer. I sit on the front steps. The tears will not stop, and I almost never cry, but I'm not myself. I will forever be someone else now. The two people I need to get in touch with, the two people who most need to hear this most horrible news, are not here. My teeth start to chatter. I want to shut my eyes and make everything stop. I no longer care if my heart pounds in my chest or if my lungs move. Who are they even moving for? Mai sits next to me, and her hand grips my shoulder. She makes a low, cooing noise. It is a drawn-out call like a dove makes, and it comes from somewhere deep inside. I try to focus everything on this sound. It makes me think, just for an instant, of that tiny squeak of the little green-rumped parrot baby made when he fell from the nest in our backyard years ago. I look over at her and see that Mai is crying too. The police officers, with Dell Duke at their jutting elbows, make phone calls to the police station, to social services, to a dozen different workers and agencies as they look for someone to tell them what to do. I don't listen, but I hear them. I cannot count anymore by sevens. I hear a voice in my head and it says, "Make this stop." That's all I know. Should they take me into something called protective custody? If they can't locate next of kin, can they turn me over to a family friend? I have to go to the bathroom, and finally that feeling is overwhelming. I take out my house key and give it to Mai, who opens the door. When I step inside, I feel certain that my mother will be in the kitchen. My father will be coming around the corner from the garage, and he'll be wearing my mom's peeper glasses. This has all been a big mistake, but the house is dark, and no one is there. It is a house now of only ghosts. It is only a museum of the past. We are done.